what was some, and I'm gonna come back. What was some experiences that you would never forget? Like, what's one that stand out that was most impactful for you in court?
I could tell you one. When I was a lawyer, we had a case where I was asked at the last minute to do a jury trial before this guy had only done a couple of hearings in front of him, Judge Rynd, and you might remember this, but it ended up being.
I wondered if that was the one you were thinking about.
Yes, in fact, I saw Dad's attorney this week and congratulate him, and but it was one of these cases where no doubt in probably anybody's mind that the mom's parental rights should be terminated. But you had a dad who wanted to raise his kid. No doubt, the child was in a wonderful foster home, and it was. On one hand, I was kind of looking at the case like, oh, this is a loss for us. But it was really, I think it was Judge Rynd who kind of addressed CPS and outside of the presence of the jury was like, asking, but why are you trying to terminate his right? What did he do?
Love it, man. 25 lighters on my dresser, yes sir. I got to get paid. Bit and it won't be a little hit. Go read a book, you illiterate son of a bitch. Step up your vocab. Don't be surprised. Patience to these false accusations. They faking the shaking, cause the money you're making. Bricks some money on the dresser. Drive a compressor. Top notch. Get the most.
Absolutely. And just quickly to introduce both you all, we have Judge Frank Rynd was a family law court judge, correct? And correct. How long were you a judge?
I'm going to guess in total about 12 years.
Wow.
I've got to do the math. Yeah, I think it was about 12. And 98. Yeah.
And we have Judge Michael Schneider, which was a juvenile judge, both out of Harris County. And how long were you a judge?
About 14 years. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And key back on, I want to make sure people understand the work you being a judge and why did y'all get into the work or get into what is it planned? Was it something in part of your heart? It was just something that came about?
Well, So when I first got out of law school, it wasn't clear that I was even going to practice law. I was doing other stuff that was fun, and I didn't even know that there existed such a thing as a child protective division at the county attorney's office. For a number of reasons, I really wasn't interested in going to the DA's office, but I kind of wanted to, if I was going to be a lawyer, try some cases. And I heard that there was this division at our county attorney's office that represented CPS, knew nothing about them. I went into that division and I really, really loved it. And I was there about maybe 6 or so years into it. One of the judges approached me and said, I think I'm going to retire. And if whoever wins the primary is someone I think is capable of doing this job, I might even quit a little early. So I decided to throw my name in and ended up winning the primary and then getting a call a couple of days later going, where's your packet? Turn in your packet. Judge Ellis just resigned. So, I didn't get into even being a lawyer, really even contemplating being a judge.
Wow. Beautiful. Love it. Thank you. Judge Rynd, how about yourself?
Well, I think, to be honest, I've kind of thought about what it would be like to be a judge, maybe even back in law school. But it was never an overwhelming ambition. When I finished law school, and I'm older, I finished law school in 1976 and worked for a law firm for almost 5 years and then got a job working in Houston. I don't know if at the Astrodome, for the old Houston Sports Association. Mm-hmm. And I was there 17 years. And I was kind of thinking, gosh, 17 years, what am I going to do, with the rest of my life? And Judge Linda Motherall was a family court judge and had a vacancy for an associate judge. And so she asked me if I'd be interested in doing it. And I said I would be. I think to her surprise and somewhat to my own surprise, I said yes. So I was an associate judge for about 3 years, and then a district judge for 9, for a total of 12. But I thought it'd just be, I hoped it would be a good way to give back, and yeah, that was sort of somewhat my motive. And when Judge Motherall, I was her associate judge, I heard all of her CPS cases, and so that's what got me involved. But then when I became a district judge, I kept hearing a lot of them. And I'm going to get on topic on the CPS matter. There are a lot of changes happening, I think. But one of the things that always bothered me when you talk about culture is there was sort of I always felt like there was I want to be careful about how I say this, but maybe a not understanding of poverty, or not understanding poor people, or not understanding that the mere fact that you have 3 children in a bedroom doesn't mean there's abuse, and that's not neglect.
Right.
And occasionally I would have CPS workers, I could tell by their testimony, horrified that 3 or 4 kids were in one bedroom. And I'm thinking, well, that doesn't mean there's not love in that family. And anyway, so it really bothered me sometimes, that reaction. Now, unfortunately, since the rate of poverty, the incidence of poverty is greater among African Americans or among single family households in general, that then tended to get crossways with CPS on a more frequent basis, I think. I was interested in reading just last night an article about the man who started Project Row Houses. And he grew up, I think he said, one of 13 children, and they were sharecroppers. But he just praised his mother and the love and the discipline that she had for those children. But he didn't say, but I guarantee they weren't living in a large home, that sort of thing. And so now he's a very well-respected artist, and the article was very insightful. But I was struck by just sort of the praise, and his childhood was a happy childhood, and not a lot of things, not a lot of stuff, but a good childhood. And so that kind of struck me, and I just happened to read that last night, this article about him. And so
it may not be rich. It may not be rich financially, but it's rich in love. It's only speaking.
That's exactly. That was sort of what he was saying, and just in clear expectations among the kids, to work hard, and to behave. He said, "My mother made us behave," but and again, I just sometimes, that is when I was a judge, one of the things I tried to watch out for is this merely the fact that it's poverty, or do we get to actual abuse? And I don't think, or real neglect.
Thank you. And when I say thank you, I'm thanking y'all both for your time and your service as well. As my experience being a caseworker and a child advocate, I've seen the work that both of you all have done. I've been in your courts, and I've been in many other courts as well. And I can sincerely say that you both care. I've seen that you actually listen to everyone as well, to actually gather the information. And it's like, I'm going to go back to where Judge Rynd started, because I want to go in and talk about the feelings and thoughts and experiences. But what Judge Rynd was talking about with CPS, including poverty, that many people recognize and many people may not know. But even when I was a CPS caseworker, I've seen some of my coworkers, even in training, when I was going through BSD training, basic skills and development, I heard people say things like, well, since they're poor, should they keep their kids? And me, as just a trainee coming out of college, my mouth, like, what do you mean? Me growing up poor and seeing what my parents experienced, I'm like, that does not give someone the right to do so. This is not going to be the best fit for you. Those are but I couldn't tell anybody that, I was young I was 22 at the time. And,
right.
Even with conversations where investigators is like, so when we go out to their home, we just bring the police with us, right? I'm like, why would you bring the police with you just to have a conversation with someone? As I tell you right now, you bring the police with you to have a conversation with me, just the first one, just to talk to me. Once again, you lose the respect right then and there. So yeah. I absolutely understand. So So Judge Schneider, once again, Judge Schneider is so unique that we seen him on. If you may have seen his face recently on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, some of the news stations around. It's working with CPS and understanding removal and poverty. What are your thoughts about that? You know, your process just with removing children in the first place.
Yeah, look, one of the reasons we have so many negative downstream consequences of CPS involvement, and when I mean taken to its extreme, like kids who age out of the foster care system, who have that high likelihood of ending up in the criminal justice system, the CPS system themselves, of being homeless. And I think a lot of that comes from removing more kids than are needed. I mean, I think that, and not that a lot of families don't need help, but when you think about it, just like one of the reasons a prison can be so destructive is that it doesn't simulate real life. Mm-hmm. Having your kids in foster care where you visit them twice a month for an hour is not really a good, it's not a great environment to learn if someone can parent. And if you could take care of more folks in the house, or with fictive kin or relatives, I think that's just so underutilized. And not just at the time of removal, but I'm lucky enough to be on the board of a nonprofit called The Way Home Adoption. And the case mining that they do for these older kids to look for relatives is unbelievable. And it just makes me think this could be done by, I mean, that's one of the things that child advocates could do, or CPS themselves, that have this sort of mining, especially, you know, when you have older kids who are 13 and 14, they're largely able to take care of themselves. And a mom who smokes weed has a very different environment in that home as opposed to a mom who may be using drugs with a newborn. Mm-hmm. You know, so that's, and I have seen, you know, I was really glad to see about a little over 2 years ago, the Texas Supreme Court came down with a case called In Re CJC, and they talk about how strong the presumption is that parents and not non-parents are making the decisions in kids' lives about who has access to them. And I believe it was Justice Bland who wrote it, and there was a line in there that about, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but it essentially said, a child should not be removed from his parents just because a state district judge thinks there's a better placement. And I thought that was wonderful. You know, I'm serious.
No, I know.
We think of non-parents interfering, or I do, of like, you know, sort of the nosy grandparent or the or CPS itself. But I like that she included in non-parents who don't have a right presumptively to interfere in lives, that she included state district judges. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I actually totally agree. I mean, and the thing that always bothered me is I didn't always have better placements. In other words, right. You know, I didn't know exactly where these kids were going. I know they were going, quote, in the custody of CPS, but I really didn't know where CPS was putting them. I mean, sometimes I did, but not always. And I did have one case, Brandon, I don't know if you were there when, but the children were actually abused in the foster home. Now, their home where they were living with their parents was not ideal. There were some problems, but they'd never been physically abused in that home. Mm-hmm. You know, and so again, they were not. I really think this was an example of maybe a class or economic. The mother was not real bright. That is true, but she took care of her kids. But they lived in sort of a motel type situation, which I realize is not ideal. But you know, they were not beaten. They were not, you know, and she did care for them. And so at any rate, it's always so. Particularly, of course, I still agree with Judge Bland. Even if you think you've got a better placement, that's not reason enough to remove kids. It's an awesome power the state has, and a scary power to remove children from their home, from their parents, and it should be used very judiciously, very carefully.
And that leads into, well, one, if is this a case that had maybe 9 to 11 kiddos on it?
They had a bunch.
Okay.
I don't remember how many exactly.
Like I don't know how. If you remember certain cases, I remember these quite a majority of my families and kids. I keep in touch with quite a bit of them too, because I'm still a mentor through the was the Hay Center.
Yes.
Yeah, so I still mentor through them. I got one of my first kid that I had as a caseworker when I was coming out of BSD. I'm still in his life. You know, he is 24, finally about to graduate from college. So think about it.
Wow,
and,
that's good.
Yeah, been in his life since he was 11. And those type of experiences, it's stressful. First and foremost, when y'all are making those decisions, I've seen the side of CPS. Sometimes they know, sometimes they do not. Okay. I've had times where, you know, for my listeners, I do a series about my CPS stories and my CPS tips. And I change the name. I just share like little pseudo situations that may happen so people can understand what it looks like being an experience as a caseworker. And I had one case where the kids had a little behavior issues. And I wish this judge could have jumped on here because I know she'll remember this case. By paper, this parent should have had her rights terminated. Like it was like, this is her. I know the old grounds have been removed recently, if I'm not mistaken. But this was on grounds old. This was like the third time in care. Previous children been terminated before. So the only thing the judge said, we just need best interest. Just say it. And I was like, okay, let's see. Let's give it some time. Volunteering out. Long story short, mother relapsed even halfway throughout the case, worked out of service, relapsed again. And the mother made a statement to me on a phone call. I was upset. I try to remain professional. But my facial expression, I have a horrible poker face. But I remember being on the phone with her, and I was upset. You know, y'all would be probably ashamed of me, the things I was saying. I wasn't cursing, but I was like we were really relying on you to get your children back. Your kids are not doing the best in care. These kids are going to be in juvenile detention to prison. Next thing we know, they're relying on you. And she said something that changed my view quite a bit. And I remember I was driving on 610, and she said, you know, Mr. Drake, if you know the 12 steps, I've learned these 12 steps, front, back, side to side. Relapse is a part of recovery. And I'm like, damn, she is right. That is the truth. And long story short, I remember I'm glad we kept going because once again, I'm a faith-based person. That's how I get through this work through this time. But I remember to the point, like, judge would always look for us. Okay, we're just waiting on you, CASA. We're just waiting on you, child advocates. Say it. And I remember one day was out at an event, and mother was calling a volunteer. I told the volunteer, hang up the phone. We're out for an event, relaxing, but we said to take it. The CPS ended up losing the kid. Didn't know where they placed him. Basically, the caseworker placed him somewhere and quit that day. Didn't turn in 2 weeks' notice or anything. No paperwork was put in, nothing. So, and not all through the weekend, I called the supervisor thinking, oh, no big deal. When the supervisor said we don't know where he's at, I flipped. I called the attorney. Oh my gosh, I can't even think of his name right now, but he flipped. All these emails going through all through that night, email, and we go into court Monday. Only reason we were able to find that child the time we found it because the caregivers asked for a clothing voucher. That's it. And so those things happen. I would say that.
Well, you know, philosophically, and I know Judge Schneider and I have had this conversation, the law was written to basically handle cases of physical and sexual abuse. But the vast majority of CPS cases involve parents with drug and alcohol problems. And so do we maybe need to treat them differently, have a different timeline? Because on the one hand, it's good the legislature put a quick timeline so kids wouldn't be in limbo forever if their parents were sexually or physically abusing them. But drug abuse and alcohol abuse is a whole different game, in my opinion. And kids can bond. They're not necessarily abused if the parent has a drug or alcohol problem. It can lead to abuse. I don't doubt that. But we live in a state or a society that doesn't offer great rehab programs, and it's tough. And as you said, your client pointed out that relapse is part of recovery, and therefore you've got all the timing situation, the timelines, and how long they can be extended, and they're just two different. I don't know. They need to be treated differently, in my opinion. I mean, and they all need to be treated individually. There's not one cookie cutter solution for any of this, and that's difficult because the law does have some generalities. But basically, if you've got a parent who occasionally relapses but is bonded to the kids and holds a job and isn't allowing dangerous people into the home, that's different than the addict who, for the drugs, might abuse their kids or allow their children to be abused. So each facts are so different. But again, it's challenging when you have such a huge percentage of the cases that are alcohol drug abuse related.
Yeah. I agree, and I would maybe even take it a step further and say something that isn't always, received well. But I don't disagree with any of that, and I also think that one of the big problems, and this is a nationwide problem, is that a lot of judges and CPS workers and attorneys who deal with these cases don't understand the way drugs and the brain interact. Mm-hmm. And there are a ton of people who, in fact, the majority of people who use even the most dangerous drugs that we know of never actually meet the criteria for a DSM-5 diagnosis of substance use disorder. Those that do, most of them who quit on their own without any sort of rehab at all. Mm-hmm. And the research is there. I mean, it's very clear, and yet, like, even expressing that notion that sometimes, like Judge Rynd was talking about, you don't want the cookie cutter situation. There are people who continue to use and may not even consider it a relapse. It's just they're different types of recovery, and for some people, abstaining from drugs completely or trying to is not for them. Now, when you balance that with having kids in the home, that can take it to a different level. But, a lot of the consequences in our systems, whether it's CPS or the criminal justice system, are actually much worse than the drugs themselves. And we know people can function and raise kids with the most dangerous drugs around because millions do it with alcohol, and there are very few drugs that are more dangerous than alcohol.
A mouthful right there from both of y'all. Because thinking outside the box and changing the system, I believe that's absolutely needed. When I was at CPS, I was taught to be strict, stern. This how it would be. I'll talk about this on other episodes, but when I said I was a caseworker, because I worked with some families, I was so stressed out I couldn't move my neck sometimes because I had disagreed with my supervisor's decision. I was threatened to be written up quite often because I was like, do you think that's actually better for the children?
Yeah.
And once again, I'll share some of my stories I've told before, which I've asked some very southpaw or unusual recommendations that you would never hear from caseworkers, such as I recommended a kid to go visit his mother while she was in prison. And I was like, because this kid is legit flipping out in these homes thinking his mother is going to be unalived. Okay. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I said he needed, and it made such a difference in his behavior afterwards. I was surprised the judge approved it, but hey, we went with it. But
how old was the kid?
He was 9. It was
wow.
9. It was young, but I'll talk about that in a second, because once again, since I started doing my CPS stories and experiences, I've taken some time and looked up some of my kids and see, Facebook, you can gather anyone. And he was raised in a very gang-related family. He wasn't abused, but his his cousins that were in the home were abused, so they had to remove all the children. But it was the system being in it was a lot that, once again, that's something we can go in detail about once again throughout the series. But it's so much you can do. But when I'm thinking about as for the Adoption and Safe Family Act, that, how do you all feel about that? I know when that went into effect, a lot of changes came from that act being put in place for CPS as far as removing children and adoption.
What specifically are you referring to?
As far as when it was signed into law, a lot of people want to basically revoke it or remove it.
Yeah, sure.
Because it put that timeline into effect. Because when I was going through training, it was always told like kids were just in care lingering while parents were dropping in and dropping out of the case. And the main focus of it was to find more permanency for the children in care. That was the goal. Well, there's still a lot of kids. I think it's gotten better, but it's still a lot of kids, especially specific kids, if we want to talk about disproportionality, that are still stuck in care. We basically removed the parental rights, and now we just don't have anywhere for them to go. And we have a whole new court, shout out to Judge Katrina Griffith, that hear just PMC cases in Harris County. And the thing is, it's not just a Harris County thing. This is across the nation. I'm in Seattle, Washington. The same issue is up here. There is great amount of children in CPS custody and parental rights been terminated, and now they're lingering in care. And a lot of folks, and I'm loving that you're saying that the timeline needs to be adjusted, especially how this went into effect in the mid to late 90s, and it's 2022, it's almost 30 years now.
Yeah, I think in Texas, it may have gone into effect in 98, something like that. But yeah, so I remember I first started hearing or dealing with CPS cases as a lawyer in 1999, and the PMC dockets were some of them were just crazy because you had all these cases where instead of terminating or whatever, they would PMC to the agency, or even long, cases where they had been gone on in the TMC, the temporary stage, for years. And so I think that has, I think that's a good goal to have. In so many cases, way before the first year that there's not going to be reunification. But there has to be a way to give more time when it's needed.
You have certain techniques with that, I would say that.
I look at it kind of two different ways. The pressure was on to get through the temporary quickly to allegedly give the kids permanency. Mm-hmm. And TMC or PMC means permanent managing care, but it doesn't provide the child permanency. It provides the court system permanency or CPS permanency, but it doesn't do anything for the kids. And when my first PMC review hearing, a new judge, haven't done this, don't have a lot of experience in it. And I said, well, what's going to be involved? Because there were 90 cases on the docket. And they said, oh, it won't take long at all. It'll be about 30 minutes. And I said, well, how can I possibly go through 90 cases? Well, initially they were going through, in my opinion, going through them. Anyway, I just said, no, we're going to take time on each case. I want the caseworkers there. By the way, that got CPS very upset. They would send one caseworker for all the PMC cases, and they would read from a printed sheet using all the initials and acronyms. And I wanted to know, well, where is the child? How many times have they been moved? I want the parents to know they can be here. One of the things Mike talked about, the charity he's involved in, which is wonderful, reminded me of an article I read several years ago in the Wall Street Journal. And that is that they are now finding in some of the PMC type cases, they can reach out, and sometimes the parents have gotten better. Their lives have changed. Not
Absolutely.
Or they have family members who've changed, who've gotten better, or now they're more reluctant or more open to talking about it. Sometimes parents shut down when CPS and, in their view, maybe the police, and they don't want to mention any family members. They don't want to get them in trouble. And now, so I really think it's important and should be required that there be an effort to reach out again to family members if the person's in PMC. and without a permanent home. I mean, it's one thing if they're in the same foster home for years, but as you know, they often bounce from foster home to foster home.
Mm-hmm.
And although they're supposed to be placed in another home where they don't have to change schools, that doesn't happen. Kids can go to 2 or 3 schools in 1 year. I mean, it's really not good. And so I think it's important that these cases be reviewed. I personally am glad that Child Advocates in Houston has started appointing people to those cases. You know, for a long time, they had a policy against it. They thought it achieved permanency and their role was over. But I think they now realize it's more complicated than that. So again, just because it's called PMC doesn't mean it's permanent for the child. And Brendan, you mentioned a few minutes ago, I always had to ask, is this really the right thing for the child? And that should really be what we try to do in every case.
Yeah. And, you know, even in cases where you can't, for whatever reason, move kids back in with their family, maximizing contact with adults and siblings who are going to be in the rest of their life is so big. You know, when you were talking earlier, Brandon, about the mentoring that you've done, that's one of the reasons why so many of these kids become homeless and go into the criminal justice system, is because they don't have anybody that they can call to borrow $90 to get a flat tire fixed, which means they lose the job at Whataburger, which means they lose their apartment 2 months later. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. That happens all the time.
Exactly. Like, I mean, my mentee, he would tell you, I'll show my Cash App right now the many times, like, hey, he needed an Uber. He has a job now. He's doing well. He's and it just took a little bit, and he thanks me out. Like, very grateful kid. But and being in college, just because you get free tuition, we'll talk about that once again, the benefits, but how many people in their family they see go to college?
Right.
How many people understand, like, you got more expenses than just tuition and just board, and then you're trying to live a life as a collegiate student? It's so much to go into it, and having advice, and when you're going through something, and it's because once again, they don't have a parent at that time. And sometimes they try to lean on some family members that may not be always supportive of that. So I champion mentoring all the time, especially for men. It's needed because they may not. We have so many children from, especially African American, and going into black. I mean, just boys, and they just need so much support because once they age out, it's not a lot of support for them out there. The state is there, but they don't even like to ask for the help sometimes. I was just on TikTok. I have live conversations, and it was a person that reached out there like, hey, this kid left their state of Mississippi. They went to Michigan, and they have no ID, no birth certificate, anything. I was like, tell them call the state. Tell them they have resources there. And I know the first thing was I wanted to get away. And I've talked to these kids, so many children on a one-on-one level. And some of them want to come to court, and I've had issues with some attorneys where they didn't want to represent what the kid wanted, and I'm like, no, this child needs to come to court. Even though I represent their best interest, you got to say what they want. And I've had some kids very mature. They may have been in your court, Judge Schneider, but I've seen some kids that I'm absolutely impressed with, and I've had numerous kids that I wish we would have got to use sooner. I absolutely wish you got to use sooner. And
about 10 years ago, I started a website called myvoiceincourt.org, and I required all of the ad litems to give the address of it to their clients, because it outlined what their rights were according to the family code for kids in CPS care, and it encouraged them, regardless of whatever court they were in, even if it wasn't my court, let them know that they had a right to talk to the judge, and here's how. And if your caseworker tells you that you can't, that's even more evidence that it's the right thing to do. And the number of kids who would come and visit was just unbelievable. And then once they came, and I almost always had a dog on the bench, and I could just say, look, you don't even have to tell anybody why you're coming up. You can say, he told me I could come up and visit his dog. And that was the way they could do it without, you know what I mean? And they go, well, Judge Schneider told me I could. And you know, there are so many. That's one of my big pet peeves is attorneys ad litem who don't advocate for what their kids want. I'm in a case right now. I won't mention the court or any of the players, but I have a client who was the only caregiver of his two girls, and he got kind of cross with the court, and the court had said no visitation. And the ad litem, when we have a guardian ad litem from Child Advocates who could advocate whatever she thinks is in the best interest, but the ad litem is not advocating for what her client wants. Is, I want to see my dad. I want to talk to my dad all the time. You guys took my cell phone. I can't do that. And look, judges know when an attorney is advocating for something that's not in the best interest, and it's just what the kid wants. But it's a cliche to say these kids deserve to have a voice, but it's true, and not just to have the court and others informed, but just to give the kid a sense of, hey, somebody's listening to me.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. You and I have never really discussed this, but I would start going to the Hayes Center the last year I was a judge and talk to the kids who are aging out. And I would ask them, you know, tell me, do you think it was wrong that CPS ever got involved in your family? And I was surprised. The great majority completely understood why CPS got involved.
Yeah.
Well, what is one thing that you really hated about it? And to a person, they almost said, I never got to go to court. I hear about this judge, but I never saw the judge. I didn't know who was making these decisions about me. And of course, I never got to say what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. And that's why I have to agree with, again, Judge Schneider completely. The ad litem needs to advocate for what they want. And a skilled ad litem can make it very clear to the judge, I don't necessarily agree. My client has asked me to convey to you, or my client has asked me to say this. And then again, an amicus attorney can advocate, for the best interest but really they need to have a voice and they need to be in court. Although that might be a little scary, for everybody, but nevertheless, they need to be there. And I will tell you, and I think it's changed. I hope it has, but in my early days when I'd say, I want the kids here, I got a lot of pushback from CPS. Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of pushback. In fact, sometimes just absolute refusal to bring them. They'd say, well, we had a mix up. Somebody didn't pick them up. But you really, for the child's sake, let them see that, what's going on. And my other pet peeve is so often the kids were never really told. All of a sudden, they're not at their parents' home anymore. God, that's got to be disruptive and hurtful. And they don't know how their parents are doing. There's often no real effort to let them speak or communicate with their parents. Talk about mental health problems. Suddenly you're worried about you're 5 years old and you're worried about your parents. And what you're hearing, I think, is your parents are so bad, we've taken you away from them. What does that do to your self-esteem and self-image? And so to me, I don't know, I'm a dreamer some days. Just to look at a whole different way. Your parents having some problems, we're getting them help. Wouldn't that be a better message? And they still love you, and we're going to make sure you get to see them. And again, there could be occasions where that's not the right thing, but in the vast majority, it's just unconscionable almost what kids are not told.
And so many kids believe they feel like they're responsible often for their parents or the situation. So it's all the alienation and the wonder that you just talked about. Plus, for some of them, especially the older kids, it's right. Absolutely.
And
if I hadn't done this, Mom wouldn't have started smoking dope. I was misbehaving. Therefore, that's how Mom coped. This is all my fault. That kind of thing.
Once again, thank y'all. Thank you. When I'm telling you, I'm loving the conversation we're having right here. And I've been nervous by having this recording, this conversation for some time. but I'm getting very emotional because just knowing that having judges and having that power, having that strong understanding of what these kids experience. And sometimes I used to feel I had an imposter syndrome, felt like I was crazy making some of the decisions I was making as a caseworker. And because other caseworkers or other supervisors or the attorney ad litem wouldn't agree with me, or even a child advocate sometimes, they're like, well, we can't do that, but we should do it. That's what I'm saying. It's not, I know but this judge don't like that. And unfortunately, I used to be that person. It was certain court that I wasn't allowed to come back in. It wasn't that I was allowed, that I'm going to speak the facts. That judge can make that decision after I bring the facts to them. And I'm going to go from there. But I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be quiet at all time. I'm not going to be bullied. And that's something I've seen some judges do. Okay. And that was in attorneys too. And that was not ineffective for the child. And I played the video game sometime. And when I left, when my kids turned 18, they'll try to reach out to me, and I add them on PlayStation, keep in touch, and they'll be on chats with like 3-4 other kids that's in care, still in care at that time, younger. And I wouldn't say anything. I just let them talk, and they would say, "I've never seen my attorney a day in my life." Yeah, been in care 4 or 5 years. I'm like, what? They'll know the name, but then there's some names around, and that's something that, once again, I've been admonished in court, been threatened to be held in contempt because I went in the hallway and I let one attorney have it because they directly lied, like bold-faced, harmful lie. What was the point? I don't understand. And went and told the judge, and the judge got upset at me. I'm like, that's something that I had to move into more of the training aspect when I went to child advocates, because I couldn't go to court anymore because honest. Yeah, and that's and I'm just hearing it. I appreciate, because I like and we can. What was some? And I'm gonna come back. What was some experiences that you would never forget? Like, what's one that stand out that was most impactful for you in court?
I could tell you one. When I was a lawyer, we had a case where I was asked at the last minute to do a jury trial before this guy had only done a couple of hearings in front of him, Judge Rynd, and you might remember this, but it ended up being.
I wondered if that was the one you were thinking about.
Yes, in fact, I saw Dad's attorney this week, and congratulate him. And but it was one of these cases where no doubt in probably anybody's mind that the mom's parental rights should be terminated. But you had a dad who wanted to raise his kid. No doubt the child was in a wonderful foster home. And it was, on one hand, I was kind of looking at the case like, oh, this is a loss for us. But it was really, I think it was Judge Rynd who kind of addressed CPS and outside of the presence of the jury was like, asking, but why are you trying to terminate his right? What did he do? And one of the reasons that sticks with me is because even to this day, I see, people have stereotypes of what a parent should be. And a lot of folks don't include males as, especially males without adult females in the home raising kids. And this guy happened to be black. And unfortunately, that seems to disproportionately happen as well. Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of people who think, well, I mean, he's a parent, but he's a guy. Why would a single guy who has a kid want to raise that kid?
Yeah, and I remember that case well also because I learned so much. I was still a relatively new judge, and I'm going to praise the lawyer who I guess I appointed to represent the dad. I think I can mention him by name because I'm saying good things. Rogers Boudreaux.
Yes.
Rogers taught me a lot. And I will tell you one of the funny things. Now this was not funny. No offense to CPS, but somehow he ended up in jail right before the trial, which had to be disturbing to him. And so we had to get some civilian clothes for him to wear. And it's a jury. He can't come in wearing that little orange outfit. And so I think it was to Rogers and I said, well, I've got some clothes I can bring. And luckily Rogers kind of looked at me and said, I don't know if you were at the bench. I think you were. I'm not really sure your style and his style are the same. That's a gentle way of putting it. Plus, he said your clothes may be a little too big for him. But he dressed, which they would have been huge. He dressed for him, what was right for him, and we were able to get him appropriate. And I think the jury, he was honest. And I think in his case, he'd never been married to the mother. That's a few strikes against you, I think, in terms of that. But his love of his son, I think, came through. And it was a jury trial, and the jury ruled in his favor pretty decisively. And it wasn't as though they had to. But I just learned a lot. I learned how to be, I hope, a better judge, how not to judge too quickly. And then also the value of a jury, good jury. You've got 12 people looking at it. And so anyway, it's funny you'd mentioned that case, because I remember that vividly. The case I'm most disappointed in myself is a case where the mother was struggling. She had a drug problem. She was probably never going to be the Betty Crocker kind of mother of the year thing. She was single. Oh my gosh, she worked her program. She was sober. She was trying so hard. She had a job like at a Pizza Hut. She had a small apartment, and she missed a psychology appointment because it was the same day she had her appointment to go get furniture from the furniture bank. And she knew she had to have a furnished apartment to get her children back. And she had a relative who was also not a wealthy man, but he had a pickup truck. He testified. So I ordered CPS to have her, return the children, and they didn't want to return the children to her. And when she arrived, they claimed she didn't have car seats for the children. And so they wouldn't turn the children over. And in fact, I think they called the police and everything. So unfortunately, though, Brandon, you mentioned occasionally you lose your temper. I kind of really blew up that day because I said, I'm sorry, having car seats. I didn't say. I ordered the children turned over to her, and CPS didn't. I ended up having to recuse myself, and I often pray for that woman. I know it went to a good judge, so I hope she got the children back. But I had to recuse myself because I really did. I blew up in the courtroom, and I shouldn't have. But I was this was a case where the mother did everything. She was poor, and she wasn't wasn't well educated. And then can you imagine the frustration? And she had left messages. I can't make that counseling appointment because I've got the furniture bank. And anyway, that's just one case I remember and am still frustrated by.
No, thank you both, seriously. And I'm hoping for our folks that are listening to this right here, once again, Judge Michael Schneider, as well as Judge Frank Rynd, formerly in 315th, as well as the 309th. Hope y'all are listening and actually absorbing the feelings that I'm feeling right now as well. Because actually doing this work for the amount of years that I've done it and still doing, it means a lot hearing this from, once again, leaders in our community. Okay, these are once elected persons, to, actually be active in making changes in people's lives. With CPS, the decisions that are made doesn't just affect the child. It doesn't just affect the parent. It affects the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the grandchildren. It affects the full lineage of the family. And every time I would go into court to even make a recommendation, I feel like that weight was on my shoulders. And I always imagine, what does it feel like to be a judge that has that type of weight and responsibility to make that decision?
Hello, beautiful people. Thank you so much for listening to our child welfare series with Everything Culture. You've just completed the first half of our conversation with our judges, Mike Schneider and Frank Rynd. To listen to the second half, make sure you subscribe, like, and share. We greatly appreciate the support that's been shown through Everything Culture. And if you'd like to find more ways to support the podcast, make sure to go to www.everythingculture.com. Once again, that's everything, culture.com. If you're interested in leaving a message, you can contact us at 832-800-3176. Once again, that's 832-800-3176. If you'd like to leave a message on YouTube or leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we'll greatly appreciate that as well. Thank you again. God bless. Peace.